this was really brought into focus for me by a quote by a guy called Dave Snowden, who made the point that every dead body on Everest was once a highly motivated person possessing a strong sense of urgency, engaged by inspired leaders with a shared purpose and a growth mindset. I think all of those other things are important, but ultimately what it comes down to is execution. One of the common misconceptions that exists about the military is that it is all about command and control styles of leadership. People have this image in their head of the drill instructor on the parade square barking at recruits and issuing instructions, and they assume that military leaders have this ability to give orders and people will just do what they are told to do. And the reality is that's not true. It doesn't really work like that. If I asked you to put your life on the line in order to do something, you probably wouldn't do it, and neither would most Marines or most soldiers. The reason they will do it is because they trust in what you are asking them to do, and they are willing to put the needs of the team before the needs of the individual. And that's very rare, but that's really what sort of military leadership is all about. When I'm talking to people about the type of high-performing culture that they are trying to create, often it's very, very different from that. But what I'd like to try and do is distill it into kind of two things, or two themes, if you like. High-performing cultures generally have high levels of autonomy. So people are clear on what they are expected to do, and crucially, they are given control to do it. So they have a conceptual sense of what is the organization trying to do, and they are given control, authority, budget to execute that and make it happen. That's one part of it, high autonomy. The other part of it is high responsibility. And what that means is that they are willing to take responsibility. They are willing to take that control that has been given to them, and they are willing to make things happen. And that means that they aren't looking to find excuses when things don't work. When mistakes are made, they are willing to put their hand up and take ownership for it. And ultimately, they are willing to be accountable for their performance. And when I talk to people about my experience in the Royal Marines, it was one where there was high levels of autonomy and equally high levels of responsibility. And I think a problem that we have in the world at the moment is that people often talk about their rights and what they are entitled to, and they talk far less about what they are responsible for and what they are going to be held to account for. And so what I try and help people to understand is that if they want to build a high-performing organization, try and increase the levels of autonomy, but equally match it with high levels of responsibility. And if you can get to that, then it's an absolute game changer. So most of the businesses that I work with are private equity backed. And for all of them, ultimately, what it comes down to is execution, actually making stuff happen. Execution, in my mind, is the bridge between where you are today, an idea, a vision, and a new reality, and actually making that happen. And for me, execution is everything. It's the most important aspect of building a business. This was really brought into focus for me by a quote by a guy called Dave Snowden, who made the point that every dead body on Everest was once a highly motivated person possessing a strong sense of urgency, engaged by inspired leaders with a shared purpose and a growth mindset. I think all of those other things are important, but ultimately what it comes down to is execution. And I think there are three things that need to exist within an organization to create the conditions for execution. The first one is clarity. What is it we're trying to achieve here? What is this organization trying to do? What is my team and department trying to do? And then what are my objectives? How do I play a part in making that happen? And if that isn't clear, and it's really easy to test because you just go down to the people at the front line of the organization and you just ask them, what are we trying to do here as an organization? What are you doing today? How does that marry up to some departmental objectives? and how does that marry up to what it is we're trying to do as an organization? If there's any confusion in that, people are not working efficiently or effectively together. So the first thing is clarity. Do people understand what we are trying to do? The second thing is a disciplined sense of focus. And I use those words very, very carefully. The fastest way to failure is trying to do too many things. And often that comes from a group of senior leaders, maybe at board or senior level, who haven't made tough decisions about what we will do and what we won't do. And you know that these are tough decisions if they feel uncomfortable around the things that we are not going to do. And the way I sort of explain this is really simply, if I give you one thing to do, one thing to focus on, a main effort, to use a military term, you can apply all of your energy and effort behind the delivery of that one thing, okay? If I give you 10 things to do, assuming all things are equal, you can only apply 10% of your effort against each of those things, which is far less execution, success, delivery. I always come back to the example of where Amazon started, right? They started with books. They entirely dominated that market. That was the one thing. We're going to get really good at selling books. And then they moved on from there to CDs and DVDs. Why? Because they were a higher value item, but they were the same size as books largely. And they made it easy to get, it made it easy for the logistics chain to get that stuff right. So really, really good example of a very clear, tightly defined, disciplined and focused strategy, all right? And the third one is accountability. And really what I'm looking for are people in the organization making commitments? Are they saying what they are going to do? And then do they actually follow through and do them? Or do people say lots of things, and ultimately when it comes down to it, when you have your project update meetings, do they just provide you with an excuse as to why that stuff hasn't been done? And early on when I left the military, this was one of the sort of starkest things that I learned, that a lot of the time people will make a commitment and they are entirely comfortable about not delivering on it. And I think good leaders create a bit of discomfort about that. They inquire as to why it hasn't happened, but ultimately they are comfortable having those difficult conversations. See, if an organization has a culture that lacks accountability, it's wheel spinning. And what I mean by that is it feels like lots of work is happening. It feels like lots of energy is being generated, but there's no forward momentum. There's no execution. Nothing's actually happening because we just go back to the same conversation again that we were meant to have a month ago, but nothing's happened because no one's actually done anything. So do people make commitments and do they deliver on them? That's the third thing. I think the first thing you will get if you create a genuinely high-performing team is that the organizational performance will be there. You will get results that other people can't get near because the organization is working and pulling in a direction to achieve that vision. You have the clarity, you have the disciplined focus, you have the high levels of accountability. You are going to get to places as an organization that other people won't. The second thing that you will have, and I think about this in a sort of, a virtuous flywheel. The second thing that you will have is that people will enjoy working there. They will be infused, motivated, engaged, inspired. You won't have to spend your leadership capital motivating people, encouraging them just to do the basics well. They'll cover those things off. They'll just do that stuff. You just need to work out, right, how do I make best use of all of this talent? And if you can create that environment where you've sort of got that moving forward, or you've created that sort of high performing team, other people will find out about it in the market and they will want to come and join you, which means now you're a magnet for talent. It makes everything easier. Your delivery, your execution, everything moves forward at a faster pace and you start to attract great people to your cause. I'll give you an example of this. I got the Elon Musk's biography by Walter Isaacson. And one of the things that sort of jumped out at me was there was an engineer who was working at Tesla, and He was suffering with sort of burnout. He was struggling with this absolutely relentless pace of execution and expectation that was required, no, expected at Tesla. And so he left. 6 months later, he came back because he went somewhere else and he was bored of it. He was just bored. And he said, the point he made was, I'd rather be burnt out than bored. Now, I know that's a really blunt, quite challenging example for lots of people, but if you create this sort of high-performing environment, people, I think, get addicted to it. I experienced it when I was in my time in the Corps. I never really had to know, I never really had to motivate anyone when I was in the Royal Marines. I just had to tell them what we were going to do, and then I had great people that helped us deliver it. It was brilliant. It was absolutely fantastic. So the first thing I'd like them to take away is an understanding that the world is a complex place. And I use that language very specifically. Complex and complicated mean two different things. Complexity is about understanding that there are so many interconnected variables that dictate the future path that we might find ourselves on, that if you try and understand or control too much, it just won't work. Your approach just won't work. So what I encourage people to do is, if they really understand complexity, to take a much more experimental approach, an approach where they try things out and double down on stuff that's worked and the sort of success of that. And I think what many people need to do is actually almost go through this process of unlearning how they've been taught. So if you think about how we get taught from a secondary school, university perspective, you get taught how to do something and then you do it, right? You get taught how to drive a car and then you get tested on it and then you do it, right? So learn, test, do is largely the kind of sort of process we follow. And in the face of complexity, the world is not as nice and neat and as controllable as that. And I think what we have to encourage people to do is have the confidence to do something, test it out, and then learn from it, almost turn that round the other way. And I think of a good example that sort of really brings this story to light is that of Instagram. So Instagram, when it was founded, the founders had this idea about creating this sort of points-based system whereby people could earn points for sort of checking in and making arrangements and plans with friends. And what I find really interesting about that is that no one liked any of that stuff, right? So they had this idea, they came up with this app. No one liked any of the features that they thought were really important, but what they really liked doing was sharing pictures with each other. So that's an example of doing something, testing it with the real world and going, hang on a sec, that's surprised us, but let's double down on what people value and what people want. That's an example of an experimental approach. And well, we all know how popular Instagram is. So the first thing is an understanding that complexity requires us to take much more of an experimental approach, simply because we just can't control all the variables that exist in the world. And if you try and do it through a sort of, a plan and execute rather than trying to adopt an experimental approach, it won't work particularly well. The second thing, and hopefully this comes across in my talks, is that leadership in the modern world is really, really hard. Leaders are expected to be inspiring, supportive, engaging, whilst giving people only the things that they want to work on, their sort of passion projects. And I'm really empathetic with the position that many leaders find themselves in, because the bar for leadership and the expectations of their people is actually really, really high, yet many of them are not given many tools to help them be effective and capable leaders to even sort of meet this high bar that they're expected to do. So what I will always try and do is get a sense of what's the audience, what's their level of understanding about this subject, and how can I bring to life some really practical tools that they can walk away and go, I'm going to implement those 1, 2, 3 things tomorrow that's going to, I believe, have a positive impact on the performance of my team. If I can do that, then I'm going to have the impact that I want, and I'll be happy with that.